Hi, my name is Skippen, and I'm back with another illustration breakdown. This time, I'm going to tell you how I drew this portrait of xinxale. You can find them at xinxale on Instagram. So I started this one off in Procreate, and whenever I go to do something full body, I always use scale with these lines just to get the balance correct. And in this case, I use like 7 or 8 lines to really block it out and make sure that all the dimensions are correct before I move on to line art and coloring. Trust me, if you do this, you're going to be a lot happier with the results. It takes a little bit more time at the beginning, but once you get used to it, it's going to be very quick, and you can even make like a template where you just bring it up every time you want to do an illustration. I then brought the drawing into clipstudio Paint, which is my preferred app for doing proper coloring, line work, and even finishing up a drawing. What I think is really powerful about the iPad now is that it's very easy to transfer your drawing between apps. If you prefer doing your sketching in one app, you can very easily take that PSD and transfer it over to another with some kind of share function. And speaking of iPads, this was like my first test drawing for the iPad Mini 5. It's something that I went into great detail. I've done many videos about it, and when I went to go really see what it could do, this was the thing that I used to really push the iPad Mini to its limits. It did perfectly fine handling something like this with many layers, very big file size, etc. And for the line work you see here, I typically use either like a custom brush that's modeled after the Photoshop basic round brush, or I really like to use the lighter pencil that comes standard with clipstudio on an A4 350 dpi canvas at about 7 pixels. It's sharp but not too sharp, so it's pretty good for an anime style where you don't want to be perfect and you also want to be a little bit quick. Then after that, we'll fast forward a little bit to where I already laid down all the colors, and it's funny because I actually use the same brushes for doing most of that base color work. The Photoshop style round brush as well as the lighter pencil are very good for getting your base colors down because they aren't super sharp. They're not like that cell shaded anime look, they're a little bit more soft, and you see I keep on going back to the blur tool just to give it a little bit more softness. I think the combination of those two brushes have kind of like a Copic marker effect where it'll lay down a fairly solid color. It's a fairly like consistent stroke, but it's soft enough that it's not like too harsh. And then if I want it to be a little bit softer, it's very easy to go with the blur tool or even the fingertip tool and get some nice like different variations in there. And as you see here, I'm using the eyedropper a lot to go back to the color that I was using before and just to really lay a nice gradation using the colors that I already laid down. And I really like this technique. It's more painterly, but it's something that I enjoy when even doing illustration in this anime type look. And then when I'm finishing coloring the skin, I tend to add different blending layers to give it just a little bit more like contrast, a little bit more color variation. So layer effects like color burn, multiply, and darken are really good for giving just that extra touch to the shadows. And then effects like overlay, add, screen, etc. are good for adding those peak brightness for the highlights, but it really blends into the other colors that you have laid down beneath. You could take a brush and just add a white stroke, but using something like a softer brush with overlay or add transitions that softer portion of the stroke from that base color to that bright highlight in a very nice way that's appealing. And I'm going to fast forward through this section a little bit faster than I normally would because I recolor the hair several times, and I want to use this as an opportunity to say that kind of going through things and redoing it several times, trying to be a perfectionist, is not the way to learn. It's something that I'm very guilty of, but I think that any aspiring artist and even a pro artist should not spend that much time redoing something. Instead, you should just look at it as this is the best I can do right now. If you stay in that mindset and move on to a new piece and get more experience, I think you're going to reach your goals a lot faster than if you stuck with the same piece and tried to fix it and spend several hours just fixing it up. Instead, you could spend that time learning new techniques, making new illustrations, and just becoming an overall better artist. And like I said, this is something I'm very guilty of, but I want to tell everyone that you should just try to finish the piece, move on to another one, because whenever I finish a piece in a timely manner, I don't redo stuff several times. I'm always so much more satisfied with the outcome. So maybe you could be a little bit more mindful, and just when you're working on something, it's very easy to get caught up in it, but just take a step back and remember that getting more experience is always going to get you closer to your drawing goals. And so this is the hair coloring portion that I ended up sticking with. I kind of went through my similar workflow, and I have a video detailing that, and I'm going to link that in the description, or you could click there in the corner. But generally how I color hair, for those who haven't seen that video, is I make a layer. My base layer for the hair is a highlight layer. That's what I want to be the main highlight layer. And then I clip a layer above that, that is the shadow layer. And I erase the shadow layer to reveal the highlights. It's a fairly simple technique, and you could kind of get as complex as you want or not complex as you want. I think it's something that like experts and beginners can both use equally, and you just kind of build upon it at your own pace. So like I said, I have a few videos on how I do hair. You can check those all out. And another thing that you might see me doing in these illustration breakdowns is going back to the line work and changing and modifying it pretty consistently. I think as you color, you might see different flaws that were not there in the sketch and even in the line work process, that things just kind of pop up as you get deeper and deeper into the process. So I think it's totally okay to go back and fix those. And occasionally I will even leave something out. Like I tend to have trouble with the nose and mouth, just they end up looking kind of strange compared to when I first did the sketch. So I purposefully will leave it out like you see in this one. And at the very end, when I think that I'm done coloring, I'll go back and add those in because they're still fairly simple. And even for an anime illustration like this, I think the nose is like completely gone for the most part. Then for the shirt and clothing, it's kind of similar to the way I do skin, that I'll lay down different layers with a flat brush or a very simple brush, and then make it more complex by smoothing it out with the blur tool and adding different layers on top of that. I think color selection is really important for doing and I think selecting the right colors to do the proper highlights and shadows is very important. Some people might just suggest taking, and I think that picking the right colors for doing this kind of shadow highlight play and I think to get the best shadows and highlights, you really want to be very meticulous in your color selection, that sometimes adding just a multiply layer is not enough, that you want to think about how the light would play on these different fabrics and colors. I'm not an expert at it, but I tend to go through and select a color and try to see how it works, and then if it doesn't work the way I want it to, I change it to something that has a little bit more maybe saturation. I think that's one thing that I'm pretty bad at, is like contrast and saturation. My older drawings were very flat, so at the very end is when like I would notice and try to add different layers on top of that, but sometimes it's just too late. But there are some things that you can change at the end of an illustration. Adding a layer with some layer effects definitely gives a little bit more like punch and contrast, and even some like vibrance to an illustration, and something, like I said, that I kind of lack when I'm doing the actual coloring process. And then I go through and add all the small details at the very end, sometimes coloring above the line art. Sometimes it's just too much work to go and make its own separate layer, or sometimes I want to replace that line art and smooth it out, fix any flaws that I had, and that involves drawing on top of your actual line art. And like I said, at the end, I go through and I put in the line work for the mouth and nose and try to fix the eyes and different things like that. So I hope you liked this video, and I hope you found it informative. If you have any other questions on how to draw, how I use the iPad for drawing, what apps I use, different things like that, I'm always open to talking in the comments. I always love interacting with people, talking about art and technology, and I'll have new videos out very soon on my opinions on different hardware and software. So I hope you'll stick around to see those. Thanks, I'm Skippen, and I'll see you next time.